The autumn rain drummed against the windows of Highgrove House as Charles sat alone in his study. 3 months had passed since Diana's tragic death in Paris, and the weight of grief still pressed heavily on his chest. The world had mourned the people's princess, but Charles carried a different burden, one filled with regret, missed opportunities, and words left unspoken. He had been avoiding Diana's personal belongings, leaving them untouched in the rooms she once occupied. But today, something drew him to her former study. Perhaps it was the anniversary of their first meeting, or maybe the letter from William asking about his mother's favorite books. Whatever the reason, Charles found himself standing before Diana's mahogany desk, his hands trembling as he reached for the drawers. The first drawer contained the usual items: pens, photographs of the boys, charity correspondence. But as his fingers explored the back of the second drawer, they touched something unexpected. A small, leather-bound book had been wedged behind a wooden panel. His heart raced as he carefully extracted it, recognizing Diana's elegant handwriting on the cover. Private Thoughts DS. Charles hesitated. Reading someone's private diary felt like an invasion even in death, but curiosity overwhelmed his reservations. He opened to the first page, dated just 2 weeks after their engagement announcement. Diana's young voice seemed to leap from the pages filled with excitement and hope about their upcoming marriage. "I can barely believe it's real," she had written. "Charles seems so sophisticated, so worldly. I hope I can be the wife he needs. I want to make him proud, to be worthy of this incredible responsibility. Mother says I should focus on producing heirs, but I dream of being his true companion, his confidant." The innocence in those early entries made Charles's throat tighten. He remembered that young woman, barely 19, thrust into a world she couldn't possibly understand. He had been 32, already set in his ways, carrying the burden of duty that had shaped his entire existence. How different things might have been if he had recognized her genuine desire to connect with him. As he turned the pages, the tone gradually shifted. The honeymoon entries revealed Diana's growing confusion about Charles's emotional distance. She wrote about their conversations or lack thereof, about her attempts to interest him in her thoughts and feelings. "I tried to tell him about my day at the hospital today," one entry read. "The children were so brave, facing their surgeries with such courage. But Charles barely looked up from his papers. Sometimes I wonder if he even sees me as a person, or just as a vessel for the monarchy's future." The entries from their early married life painted a picture Charles had never fully grasped. Diana wrote about her struggles with royal protocol, her fear of making mistakes, her desperate wish for guidance that never came. She documented every slight, every moment of feeling overlooked or dismissed, but also every small kindness from palace staff or moment of joy with the young princes. "I know he loves his garden more than he loves me," she had written during their second year of marriage. "I watch him tend to his plants with such care, such attention to their needs. I wish he would look at me the way he looks at his roses, as something worth nurturing, worth protecting from the harsh elements." Charles set the diary down, his vision blurred by tears he hadn't expected. He walked to the window, staring out at the very garden Diana had written about. Every carefully tended flower bed now seemed like an accusation. Had he really been so blind to her needs? So focused on his duties and interests that he missed the young woman desperately trying to find her place beside him? He returned to the diary, flipping ahead several months. The entries grew more melancholic as Diana struggled with her new role. She wrote about feeling trapped in a gilded cage, about the constant scrutiny from the press, about her growing realization that she was expected to be seen but not heard, to smile but not speak her mind. "The press calls me shy," she wrote, "but I'm not shy, I'm terrified. Terrified of saying the wrong thing, of embarrassing Charles, of proving that I'm not cut out for this life. I practice conversations in the mirror, trying to find the right words, the right tone, but when I'm with him everything comes out wrong or doesn't come out at all." One entry, written after a particularly difficult public engagement, revealed the depth of Diana's insecurity. "Charles corrected me 3 times today in front of the others. I know he means well, but each correction feels like proof that I'm failing him, failing the crown. I see the disappointment in his eyes even when he tries to hide it. I'm becoming someone I don't recognize. Anxious, uncertain, desperate for approval I can't seem to earn. The most heartbreaking entries came from the period when Diana was struggling with bulimia. She wrote about her shame, her inability to control the destructive cycle, her fear that Charles would discover her secret and be disgusted. I know I'm destroying myself, she had written, but it's the only thing that makes the anxiety go away, even temporarily. I want to tell Charles, to ask for help, but how can I burden him with this weakness when he already seems so disappointed in who I am? Charles closed the diary, unable to read more. The young woman in those pages bore little resemblance to the confident, radiant princess the world had come to love. This Diana was vulnerable, scared, desperately seeking connection and understanding. And he, her husband, the one person who should have provided that sanctuary, had been too wrapped up in his own world to notice her drowning. He thought about all the arguments, all the misunderstandings, all the moments when he had chosen duty over compassion, protocol over genuine connection. The diary revealed a truth he had been too proud or too blind to see. Diana hadn't been difficult or attention-seeking. She had been a young woman crying out for love, acceptance, and partnership in a world that demanded perfection while offering little support. As the rain continued to fall against the windows, Charles realized that the diary in his hands contained more than just Diana's private thoughts. It held the key to understanding how their marriage had unraveled, how two people who had once hoped for happiness had become strangers, sharing only a title and two beloved sons. The weight of this knowledge settled on his shoulders like a heavy cloak, and he knew that reading further would only deepen his remorse. But he also knew he had to continue. Diana deserved to have her story heard, even if only by him, even if it came too late to change anything between them. Charles poured himself a brandy and settled back into his leather chair, steeling himself to continue reading Diana's diary. The next section covered the period when William was born, and he expected to find joy and celebration. Instead, he discovered a young mother struggling with postpartum depression while feeling completely alone in her experience. "Everyone expects me to be overjoyed," Diana had written when William was just 3 weeks old. "And I am. I love this little boy more than life itself, but I also feel like I'm drowning. I cry for no reason. I can't sleep even when William is sleeping, and I feel like I'm failing at the most important job I'll ever have." Charles tries to help, but he doesn't understand. When I try to explain how overwhelmed I feel, he just tells me it's normal for new mothers to be emotional. The entries revealed how isolated Diana felt during those crucial early months of motherhood. She wrote about the army of nannies and staff who surrounded her, all experts in their fields, all making her feel inadequate in comparison. "They know exactly what to do when William cries," she wrote. "I'm his mother, but I feel like the least qualified person in the room." Charles remembered those days differently. He had thought Diana was adjusting well to motherhood, that her emotional moments were simply the natural result of hormones and sleepless nights. Reading her words now, he realized how desperately she had needed emotional support, not practical solutions. While he had focused on ensuring she had the best medical care and professional help, she had needed him to simply listen, to validate her feelings, to assure her that she was enough. The diary entries from Harry's birth told a similar story, but with an added layer of sadness. Diana wrote about feeling more confident as a mother the second time around, but also more aware of the growing distance between her and Charles. "I look at Charles holding Harry," she wrote, "and I see glimpses of the man I fell in love with. He's so gentle with the boys, so patient. I wish he could be that way with me. Sometimes I think he loves them more easily because they're innocent. They haven't disappointed him yet like I have." One entry particularly cut deep. "I overheard Charles talking to his mother about Harry's christening. She suggested that I might want to tone down my emotional responses during the ceremony. They speak about me like I'm a problem to be managed rather than a person with feelings. I wanted to burst into the room and defend myself, but what would be the point? They've already decided who I am." As Charles read about Diana's growing involvement with charity work, He began to understand how it had become her lifeline. Her entries showed a woman discovering her own strength and purpose outside the confines of royal duty. "Today I held a baby with AIDS," she wrote. "The doctors warned me about public perception, but I didn't care. This child needed love, not fear. When I held him, I felt more useful, more myself, than I have in months." The diary revealed how Diana's charitable work had been both a source of fulfillment and a point of contention in their marriage. Charles had often criticized what he saw as her spontaneous, emotion-driven approach to royal duties. But her words showed a woman who understood that her position gave her a unique opportunity to bring attention to causes that mattered to her. "Charles thinks I'm too impulsive," she wrote after a particularly successful hospital visit. "He says I need to consider the broader implications of my actions, the precedents I'm setting. But when I see a child in pain, I can't think about precedents. I just want to help. Maybe that makes me unsuitable for this role, but I can't change who I am." The entries from the mid-1980s revealed Diana's growing awareness of Charles's relationship with Camilla. At first, her suspicions were tentative, expressed through questions and observations. "Charles received 3 phone calls tonight that he took in private," she wrote. "When I asked who called, he was vague. I know I'm probably being paranoid, but something feels different lately." As the evidence mounted, Diana's entries became more direct and painful. She wrote about finding letters, about Charles's distant behavior, about feeling like an outsider in her own marriage. "I confronted him tonight," she wrote after one particularly difficult conversation. "He didn't deny it outright, but he didn't confirm it either. He just said that I was being emotional and irrational, that I was imagining things. But I know what I know. I can see it in his eyes when he looks at me, or rather, when he refuses to look at me." The most heartbreaking entries came from Diana's attempts to save their marriage despite the growing evidence of Charles's infidelity. She wrote about trying to be the wife she thought he wanted, about changing herself to accommodate his preferences, about the counseling sessions that seemed to lead nowhere. "The therapist asked us what we wanted from each other," Diana wrote after one session. "I said I wanted to feel like Charles's partner, his equal, someone he turned to for support and companionship. Charles said he wanted understanding and space to fulfill his duties without constant emotional drama. Even our therapist looked uncomfortable with the silence that followed." Diana's entries also revealed her growing friendship with other members of the royal family who had experienced similar struggles. She wrote about conversations with Sarah Ferguson, about finding solidarity with other women who had married into the institution and struggled to maintain their identity. "Sarah understands," Diana wrote. "She knows what it's like to love someone who belongs to the crown first and to you second, if at all." One entry showed Diana's growing awareness of her own strength and worth. "I was looking through old photos today, pictures from before my marriage. I barely recognized that young woman. She looked so hopeful, so eager to please. I miss her innocence, but I don't miss her naivety. I'm learning that I have value beyond my ability to produce heirs and look pretty in photographs. The children I meet through my charity work don't care about my title or my marriage troubles. They just care that someone sees them, someone cares about their pain." As the entries progressed through the late 1980s, Charles could see Diana evolving from a confused, desperate young woman into someone more confident and self-aware. But he could also see how this growth had created an even wider chasm between them. The stronger Diana became, the more threatened he had felt. The more she asserted her own opinions and methods, the more he had retreated into formality and distance. "I think Charles is afraid of who I'm becoming," she wrote in an entry that made Charles pause. The woman he married was malleable, eager to please, willing to be shaped by others' expectations. But I'm not that woman anymore. I can't be. I've seen too much suffering to stay silent about injustice, felt too much pain to pretend everything is perfect. If that makes me unsuitable to be his wife, then perhaps we both deserve better than this charade. Charles set down the diary again, overwhelmed by the weight of Diana's words. He could see now how his attempts to mold her into the perfect royal wife had slowly killed the very qualities that had attracted him to her in the first place. Her spontaneity, her emotional honesty, her genuine care for others. These weren't flaws to be corrected, but gifts to be cherished. The rain had stopped, and pale sunlight filtered through the clouds. Charles looked out at his garden, seeing it now through Diana's eyes, not as a refuge from human complexity, but as a symbol of his preference for things he could control and predict. Plants didn't challenge him, didn't ask uncomfortable questions, didn't force him to examine his own shortcomings. He realized that he had to keep reading, no matter how much it hurt. Diana's story deserved to be heard, and perhaps understanding. Her pain could help him become a better father to William and Harry, who carried pieces of her heart within them. The fire in the hearth had burned down to glowing embers as Charles continued reading, now deep into the most difficult period of Diana's diary entries. The late 1980s and early 1990s revealed a woman caught between her public role as the beloved Princess of Wales and her private anguish as a wife, feeling increasingly abandoned. One entry stopped him cold. "I found myself standing on the palace balcony tonight, looking down at the courtyard below. For just a moment I understood why some people choose to end their pain permanently, but then I thought of William and Harry sleeping in their beds, and I knew I could never leave them. They need at least one parent who puts them first." Charles's hands shook as he read those words. He had never known how close to the edge Diana had come, how desperately she had been struggling while maintaining her public composure. The entry continued with Diana's resolution to find professional help, despite the palace's concerns about privacy and reputation. "I don't care what the courtiers think anymore," she had written. "I need help, and my sons need a mother who is whole and healthy. If seeking therapy damages my reputation, so be it. I can't pretend to be perfect any longer. It's killing me from the inside." The diary entries from Diana's therapy sessions provided insight into her growing self-awareness and determination to heal. She wrote about confronting her childhood trauma, her pattern of seeking approval from unavailable men, and her tendency to blame herself for others' failures to love her properly. "Dr. Patterson asked me today what I would say to my 19-year-old self if I could go back," Diana wrote. "I told her I would say, 'You are enough, exactly as you are. Don't change yourself to fit someone else's idea of who you should be.' She asked why I found that so hard to believe now. I couldn't answer, but I think it's because Charles has never once told me I was enough as I am." The entries revealed Diana's growing understanding of the toxic dynamics in their marriage. She wrote about recognizing the patterns of emotional manipulation, the way her legitimate concerns were dismissed as hysteria, the constant message that her feelings were inconvenient problems to be managed rather than valid experiences to be acknowledged. "I realize now that Charles never intended to have a partner," she wrote in a moment of clarity. "He wanted an accessory, someone to fulfill the visual requirements of marriage while demanding nothing emotionally. When I began to have needs, opinions and feelings that didn't align with his comfort, I became the problem. But I was never the problem. The problem was his inability to see me as a complete person worthy of love and respect." Charles found himself remembering specific incidents that Diana had documented. A formal dinner where she had tried to contribute to a conversation about urban poverty, only to be subtly but clearly shut down by Charles's dismissive tone. A charity event where she had deviated from the planned script to speak from her heart about the children they were helping, leading to a cold, silent car ride home and a lecture about protocol. "I used to think that if I just tried harder, if I just learned all the rules and followed them perfectly, Charles would love me," Diana wrote. "Now I understand that the rules were designed to keep me small, to ensure I never became too comfortable, too confident, or too independent. A woman who knows her worth is dangerous to men who prefer their wives grateful and insecure." The diary entries from the early 1990s showed Diana beginning to reclaim her power, despite the personal cost. She wrote about her famous BBC interview, the careful consideration that went into every word, the fear and excitement of finally telling her own story. "I know they'll say I've betrayed the family," she wrote the night before the interview aired, "but I've been betraying myself for years by staying silent. William and Harry deserve to know that their mother fought for truth, even when it was inconvenient. I want them to understand that sometimes being loyal to others means being disloyal to yourself." and that's never sustainable. Charles remembered the fury that had followed Diana's interview, the crisis meetings, the damage control efforts. Reading her perspective now, he understood that her decision hadn't been about revenge or attention-seeking. It had been about survival, about refusing to be erased from her own story. The entries following the interview showed Diana grappling with the consequences of her honesty. She wrote about the isolation from certain family members, the increased scrutiny from the press, the fear about how her children would be affected. But she also wrote about feeling free for the first time in years. "I sleep better now," she wrote, several weeks after the interview. "For all the chaos it's created, I finally feel like I'm living authentically. The boys ask me questions now, and I can give them honest answers instead of careful half-truths. They're young, but they're not stupid. They knew something was wrong even when we pretended everything was fine." The diary revealed Diana's deep concern for how the marital breakdown was affecting William and Harry. She documented every conversation, every sign of stress from the boys, every attempt to shield them from the worst of the conflict while still being honest about the reality of their parents' relationship. "William asked me yesterday if Charles and I were getting divorced," she wrote. "I could see the fear in his eyes, the worry that somehow he and Harry were responsible. I held him close and told him that sometimes adults grow apart, but that both Charles and I would always love him and his brother completely. I hope I said the right things. I feel like I'm walking through a minefield every time they ask difficult questions." The entries from the period of their separation showed Diana trying to navigate her new reality as a single mother and public figure. She wrote about the challenges of maintaining her royal duties while establishing her independence, about learning to make decisions without seeking approval from Charles or the palace hierarchy. "I'm learning to trust my own judgment," she wrote. "For so long I second-guessed every decision, worried about what Charles would think, what the press would say, what the public would expect. But I'm discovering that my instincts are actually quite good. When I follow my heart, especially in my charity work, good things happen." Charles found himself admiring the woman revealed in these later entries. Diana had emerged from their toxic marriage with her compassion intact, her determination strengthened, and her sense of purpose clarified. She had refused to become bitter, despite having every right to bitterness. One entry particularly moved him. "I saw Charles at Harry's school. Play today. We managed to sit together without arguing, even shared a laugh when Harry forgot his lines. For a moment I remembered why I fell in love with him, his gentle humor, his love for our children. I felt sad for all of us, for what we might have been if we had been different people, if the circumstances had been different. But I also felt grateful that we created William and Harry together. They are the best of both of us." The diary also revealed Diana's growing awareness of her global influence and her determination to use it meaningfully. She wrote about her work with landmine victims, her advocacy for AIDS patients, her visits to homeless shelters. Each entry showed a woman who had found her calling in service to others who were suffering or marginalized. "The palace calls my charity work unofficial," she wrote, as if that diminishes its value. "But I think being unofficial might be my greatest strength. I don't have to worry about diplomatic protocols or political implications. I can just go where I'm needed and do what feels right. The people I help don't care about my title. They care that someone with a platform is using it to shine light on their struggles." As Charles neared the end of this section of the diary, he was struck by Diana's evolution from a broken, desperate woman into someone who had found strength through adversity. She had transformed her pain into purpose, her isolation into independence, her silence into a voice for the voiceless. The last entry in this section was dated just 6 months before her death. "I feel like I'm finally becoming who I was meant to be. It's taken me years to understand that my sensitivity isn't a weakness. It's my superpower. In a world that often seems cold and disconnected, the ability to feel deeply and love unconditionally is exactly what's needed. I wish it hadn't taken me so long to realize this, but I'm grateful to know it now." Charles closed the diary and sat in the darkness, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he had lost. Not just a wife, but a woman who had grown into someone extraordinary, despite his failure to nurture or appreciate her gifts. The tragedy wasn't just that Diana had died too young, it was that he had never truly known the remarkable woman she had become. Dawn was breaking over the countryside as Charles reached the final section of Diana's diary. These last entries, written in the months before her death, revealed a woman who had finally found peace with herself and her place in the world, even as she grappled with new challenges and relationships. The entries from 1997 showed Diana at her most confident and purposeful. She wrote about her work with landmines, her trip to Angola, and her determination to use her global platform for humanitarian causes that truly mattered to her. "The palace is nervous about my landmine campaign," she wrote after returning from Angola. "They worry about me appearing to take political stances, about stepping outside the traditional royal role. But how can I worry about protocol when I've seen children who will never walk again because of these weapons? Some things are more important than diplomatic comfort." Charles remembered the criticism Diana had faced for her involvement in the landmine issue. He had been among those who worried about the political implications, who had suggested she focus on less controversial, charitable causes. Reading her passionate words now, he felt ashamed of his lack of support for work that was clearly so meaningful to her. The diary also revealed Diana's thoughts about her relationship with Dodi Fayed. Charles had dreaded reading this section, expecting to find harsh criticisms of himself or detailed accounts of her new romance. Instead, he found entries that were surprisingly thoughtful and nuanced. "Dodi is kind to me in ways I had forgotten were possible," she wrote early in their relationship. "He listens when I talk, asks questions about my thoughts and feelings, treats me like someone whose opinions matter. I had almost forgotten what it felt like to be valued for my mind as well as my appearance." The entries about Dodi revealed Diana's caution about rushing into another serious relationship. She wrote about her determination to learn from her past mistakes, to maintain her independence, and to ensure that any future partnership would be based on mutual respect and genuine compatibility. "I won't make the same mistakes I made with Charles," she wrote. "I was so young then, so desperate to be loved, so willing to lose myself in someone else's vision of who I should be. I know who I am now, and I won't compromise my authentic self for anyone, no matter how charming or attentive they might be." Charles was surprised by Diana's continued concern for his well-being and their co-parenting relationship. Despite everything they had been through, her entries showed a woman who wanted peace between them for the sake of their children. "Charles looked tired at William's sports day," she wrote. "I know the pressure he's under, the weight of expectations he carries. I wish we could have found a way to support each other through those burdens instead of becoming additional sources of stress. The boys need both of their parents to be strong and happy." The diary revealed Diana's deep love for William and Harry, but also her concerns about raising them within the constraints of royal life. She wrote about trying to give them as normal a childhood as possible while preparing them for their future roles. "I took the boys to McDonald's yesterday," she wrote with obvious joy. "William was mortified at first, worried about being recognized, but Harry thought it was the best adventure ever. I want them to understand that their titles don't make them better than anyone else. They just give them more responsibility to serve others with humility and compassion." Diana's entries also showed her grappling with her own relationship with the media and public attention. She wrote honestly about the intoxication of being beloved by millions, but also about the pressure and isolation that fame could bring. "The crowds today were enormous," she wrote after a charity event. "Their love and support means everything to me, but sometimes I feel like I'm living in a fishbowl. Every expression is analyzed, every gesture interpreted. I appreciate their affection, but I long for the simple pleasure of walking down a street, unnoticed, of having a conversation without wondering who might be listening." One entry particularly moved Charles because it showed Diana's forgiveness and wisdom about their failed marriage. "I was angry for so long about what happened between Charles and me. I felt like a victim, like my life had been ruined by his inability to love me properly. But I'm learning that holding on to that anger only hurts me. We were both young and ill-prepared for what we faced. He did the best he could with the emotional tools he had, just as I did. Our marriage failed, but it gave me William and Harry, and it taught me lessons about myself that I needed to learn." The diary revealed Diana's growing spiritual awareness and her search for meaning beyond material success or public adoration. She wrote about meditation, about finding peace in quiet moments, about her belief that her experiences had been preparing her for some greater purpose. I feel like everything I've been through, the pain, the struggles, the public scrutiny, has been building toward something important, she wrote. I don't know what it is yet, but I can sense it coming. Maybe it's about showing other women that they can survive betrayal and emerge stronger. Maybe it's about using my visibility to help people who would otherwise be ignored. Whatever it is, I'm ready for it. Charles found himself weeping as he read Diana's reflections on their shared past and her hopes for their children's futures. Even after everything, she had retained such love and optimism. I dream sometimes about what William and Harry will become, she wrote. I see them as men who understand that true strength comes from compassion, that real power lies in lifting others up rather than keeping them down. They have Charles's sense of duty and my emotional sensitivity. If they can balance those gifts, they'll be extraordinary leaders. The final entries in the diary were written just days before Diana's trip to Paris. They showed a woman full of life and plans, excited about upcoming projects, and hopeful about her future. I'm meeting with representatives from several charities next week to discuss expanding the landmine work, she wrote. There's so much more to be done, so many lives that could be saved if we can change policies and raise awareness. I feel more energized about my work than I have in years. Her last entry, dated August 29, 1997, was heartbreakingly ordinary. The boys go back to school soon. Harry is nervous about his new classes, but William is excited about taking on more responsibility as a senior student. I'm so proud of both of them. They're growing into such thoughtful, caring young men. Whatever mistakes Charles and I made in our marriage, we got parenting right. That might be our greatest accomplishment together. Charles closed the diary for the final time, overwhelmed by the complete picture of the woman he had been married to for 15 years but had never truly known. Diana's journey from an insecure teenager to a confident, compassionate global figure had happened largely without his support or recognition. She had found her strength despite him, not because of him. The Diana revealed in these pages was complex, flawed, human, and ultimately magnificent. She had struggled with depression, eating disorders, and the aftermath of childhood trauma. She had made mistakes, lost her temper, acted impulsively, but she had also possessed an extraordinary capacity for growth, forgiveness, and love. Most painfully, Charles realized that Diana had become exactly the kind of person he could have loved completely, if he had been emotionally mature enough to appreciate her qualities. Her authenticity, her emotional intelligence, her ability to connect with people from all walks of life, her dedication to making a difference in the world, these were all traits he now valued deeply. The tragedy wasn't just that Diana had died young. It was that their marriage had ended just as she was becoming her truest, most powerful self. They had missed their chance to know each other as fully realized adults, to perhaps find friendship, if not love, to co-parent their children from a place of mutual respect rather than painful history. As the sun rose fully over Highgrove, Charles sat surrounded by the evidence of a life he had never fully understood while it existed. Diana's diary had shown him not just her story, but his own. The story of a man too frightened of vulnerability to recognize love when it was offered freely, too bound by duty to embrace the spontaneity and passion that might have saved them, both. The weight of this knowledge settled over him like a shroud. He had spent decades believing that Diana was the problem in their marriage, too emotional, too unpredictable, too demanding. Now he saw the truth. She had been the solution he was too blind to recognize. Charles sat motionless in his chair as the morning light grew stronger. The diary closed in his lap, but its contents burning in his memory. The woman revealed in those pages bore little resemblance to the person he had constructed in his mind during their troubled marriage. For years he had told himself that Diana was unstable, attention-seeking, impossible to please. The diary painted a completely different picture, one of a young woman desperately trying to find her place in an impossible situation while dealing with her own deep-seated wounds. He thought about their early arguments, the ones that had seemed so unreasonable to him at the time. Diana would become upset about something that appeared trivial, a canceled dinner, a forgotten conversation, his failure to ask about her day. He had dismissed these reactions as dramatic overreactions, evidence of her emotional instability. Now he understood they were the desperate attempts of someone who felt invisible in her own marriage, crying out for basic acknowledgement and care. The revelation that hit him hardest was how much Diana had loved him, even after everything fell apart. Her diary entries showed a woman who had genuinely believed in their partnership, who had tried everything she could think of to make their marriage work. She had changed her appearance, her interests, her very personality in attempts to become someone he could love. And when those efforts failed, she had blamed herself rather than him. Charles remembered their last conversation before her trip to Paris. It had been about Harry's upcoming school term, a practical exchange about schedules and arrangements. He had been cordial but distant, treating her like a coworker rather than the mother of his children, the woman who had once hoped to be his life partner. If he had known it would be their final conversation, would he have said something different? Would he have finally found the courage to acknowledge her worth, to apologize for his failures, to express gratitude for the gift of their sons? Rising from his chair, Charles walked through the house to the room where Diana's other belongings remained untouched. He opened the wardrobe and touched the elegant gowns that had made her a fashion icon, remembering how she had lit up every room she entered. But the diary had shown him that beneath that radiant exterior was a woman who often felt awkward and uncertain, who practiced her public appearances in private, who longed to be valued for more than her beauty and charm. He pulled out one of her notebooks, filled with her plans for charity events and personal reflections on her work. Her handwriting covered page after page with ideas for helping others, children's hospitals that needed attention, homeless shelters that required funding, international causes that deserved awareness. Reading through these pages, Charles saw the depth of Diana's commitment to service. While he had often criticized her approach as too emotional or unprofessional, her notes revealed careful research, thoughtful planning, and genuine expertise in the causes she championed. She had studied statistics on homelessness, researched the most effective AIDS prevention programs, consulted with experts on landmine removal. Her work hadn't been the whimsical hobby he had dismissed it as. It had been a serious calling backed by real knowledge and strategic thinking. One particular page stopped him. It was a draft of a letter Diana had written to him, but apparently never sent, dated about 6 months before their separation was announced. The words were crossed out and rewritten in places, showing how carefully she had chosen each phrase. My dearest Charles, I know we have grown apart, and I know that much of the blame for our troubles has been placed on my shoulders. I accept that I have made mistakes, that my emotions have sometimes gotten the better of me, that I have not always lived up to the expectations placed upon me as your wife, but I want you to know that my love for you has never wavered, even when I have felt unloved in return. I believe we could still find our way back to each other if we were both willing to try. I am willing to forgive everything if you are willing to start again. Our sons need parents who love each other, even if that love looks different than it did when we were young. Please consider giving us one more chance. The letter was never finished, ending mid-sentence as if Diana had realized the futility of sending it. Charles's throat constricted as he imagined her sitting at her desk, pouring her heart onto paper, hoping against hope that he might be willing to rebuild their relationship. How different their story might have been if she had sent that letter, if he had been mature enough to receive it with an open heart. He found another unfinished letter, this one addressed to William and Harry, apparently written during one of Diana's darkest periods. My precious boys, if you are reading this, it means that I am no longer able to tell you these things myself. I want you to know that being your mother has been the greatest privilege of my life. Every day with you has been a gift, even on the hardest days when the sadness felt overwhelming. You are both so special, so full of love and potential. Never let anyone tell you that your feelings don't matter, that being sensitive makes you weak. Your ability to care deeply will be your greatest strength. The letter continued with specific advice for each son, revealing Diana's deep understanding. of their individual personalities and needs. For William, she had written about the burden of being heir to the throne and the importance of staying connected to his own heart despite the pressure to be perfect. For Harry, she had focused on his free spirit and the need to find a purpose that would channel his energy positively. Charles realized that these letters represented Diana's attempt to parent their children even beyond her own life, to ensure that her love and wisdom would somehow reach them if she couldn't be there to provide it in person. The thought that she had been struggling so deeply while maintaining her public composure filled him with a mixture of admiration and regret. Moving to Diana's dressing table, he found a small jewelry box he had never noticed before. Inside were not expensive pieces but sentimental items: a locket with baby pictures of William and Harry, a simple bracelet she had bought during a private moment in Africa, a ring her father had given her as a child. These were the treasures she had valued most, reminders of love and meaningful experiences rather than displays of wealth or status. At the bottom of the jewelry box was a folded piece of paper. Charles recognized his own handwriting immediately. It was a note he had written to Diana early in their marriage, thanking her for her support during a difficult period with his parents. The note was brief and formal, but Diana had kept it for over 15 years. The paper was worn soft from handling, suggesting she had read it many times. The realization that Diana had cherished this small gesture of appreciation, had held onto it through all their troubles, broke something inside. Charles? He had so rarely acknowledged her efforts, so seldom expressed gratitude for her support. This single note had meant enough to her to preserve it like a precious relic, evidence that she had treasured even the smallest signs of his affection. Charles sank into Diana's chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of his blindness. Every item in this room told a story of a woman he had failed to see clearly. Her books revealed intellectual curiosity he had never encouraged. Her photographs showed a warmth and joy in her relationships with others that he had rarely experienced with her. Her personal items spoke of someone who valued love over luxury, connection over status. The phone rang, startling him from his reverie. It was William, calling to check on his father and to discuss plans for the upcoming memorial service marking the anniversary of Diana's death. As Charles spoke with his son, he heard Diana's voice in William's compassionate tone, saw her eyes in his concern for others. After hanging up, Charles realized that Diana lived on not just in their son's physical features, but in their characters. William's dedication to mental health causes, Harry's work with veterans, and his easy way with children. These were Diana's gifts to the world, channeled through the young men she had raised with such love and intention. For the first time since finding the diary, Charles felt a flicker of hope alongside his grief. While he couldn't change the past or bring Diana back, he could honor her memory by finally seeing her clearly, by appreciating the legacy she had left in their children, by supporting the causes that had mattered so deeply to her. He thought about Camilla, about the life he was building now. His relationship with Camilla was so different from what he had shared with Diana. Quieter, more comfortable, based on shared interests and genuine friendship that had evolved into love. With Camilla, he felt safe to be himself without pretense or performance. But reading Diana's diary, he realized that safety and comfort, while valuable, were not the same as the passionate partnership Diana had hoped for, the deep emotional intimacy she had craved. Charles wondered if he was even capable of the kind of love Diana had needed, the vulnerability and openness that true intimacy required. He had been shaped by a childhood that valued duty over emotion, restraint over expression. Diana had been asking him to be someone he didn't know how to be, but that didn't excuse his failure to try, his refusal to even acknowledge what she needed. As the day wore on, Charles found himself seeing his entire life through new eyes. The diary had not just revealed Diana's inner world, it had forced him to confront his own limitations, his own fears, his own failures as a husband and partner. The weight of the self-knowledge was almost unbearable, but he knew he couldn't turn away from it. Diana deserved to have her truth acknowledged, even if only by him, even if it came too late to change anything between them. The sun was setting over Highgrove as Charles made his way to the garden, Diana's diary clutched against his chest. He walked slowly along the paths he had tended for decades, seeing them now through her eyes, not as a refuge from human complexity, but as a symbol of love expressed through careful attention and nurturing care. If only he had shown her the same patience and dedication he had given to his roses. He stopped at a bench overlooking the organic vegetable garden, a project Diana had encouraged him to start years ago. She had been excited about growing food that could be donated to local food banks, about teaching William and Harry where their meals came from. At the time, he had dismissed her enthusiasm as another of her passing interests. Now he understood it had been her way of trying to share in something meaningful to him while making it serve a greater purpose. Sitting on the bench where they had once planned Harry's birthday party, Charles opened the diary one final time. He turned to a page he had marked earlier, an entry that had struck him with particular force. "I've been thinking about forgiveness today, not just forgiving Charles, but forgiving myself. I spent so many years believing I was the problem, that if I could just be better, smarter, less emotional, more understanding, everything would work out. But I'm learning that love isn't something you earn through perfection. Real love accepts your flaws while encouraging your growth. It doesn't ask you to erase yourself to make room for someone else's comfort." Those words had changed something fundamental in how Charles saw their entire relationship. Diana hadn't failed at being the wife he needed. He had failed at being the husband she deserved. She had loved him with the full intensity of her generous heart, and he had treated that love like an inconvenience, a burden to be managed rather than a gift to be treasured. As darkness began to fall, Charles found himself speaking aloud to the empty garden, words he had never been brave enough to say when Diana could hear them. "I'm sorry, Diana. I'm sorry. I was too proud to see your worth when you were here. I'm sorry I made you feel small when you were actually extraordinary. I'm sorry I chose duty over love, protocol over connection, my own comfort over your happiness. You deserve so much better than what I gave you." The words felt inadequate, but they were a beginning. Charles realized that his guilt and regret, while justified, wouldn't honor Diana's memory if they only led to self-pity and paralysis. The woman revealed in the diary had been resilient, forward-thinking, focused on making positive change in the world. She wouldn't want her story to end with his tears. She would want it to inspire action. Standing up from the bench, Charles made a silent vow. He would ensure that Diana's charitable work continued and expanded. He would support the causes she had championed, particularly the landmine campaign that had meant so much to her in her final months. He would be the kind of father to William and Harry that honored the values she had instilled in them. Emotionally present, encouraging of their individual paths, supportive of their desire to use their positions for meaningful service. More importantly, he would try to become the kind of man who could learn from his mistakes, who could acknowledge his limitations without being paralyzed by them, who could love more openly and honestly in whatever years remained to him. Charles thought about his relationship with his sons and how it had evolved since Diana's death. In their grief, they had drawn closer together, finding ways to honor their mother's memory through their work and their commitment to each other. William's marriage to Catherine had brought joy back into their family, and Charles could see Diana's influence in how William approached his role as husband and father, with attention, affection, and genuine partnership. Harry's struggles with grief and anger had been more visible, but Charles now understood them better having read Diana's diary. Harry had inherited not just her compassion, but also her emotional intensity, her inability to hide her feelings behind a facade of royal composure. Where Charles had once worried about Harry's openness about mental health struggles, he now saw it as a gift, the kind of authentic leadership Diana would have celebrated. Walking back toward the house, Charles paused at the rose garden. Earlier, that day, he had decided to create a memorial garden for Diana, planted with flowers that had special meaning in her life. But now he realized that the real memorial to Diana wouldn't be found in any garden or statue. It would be in the lives touched by her compassion, the causes advanced by her advocacy, the children raised with the values she had championed. Inside the house, Charles found himself drawn back to the study where this day of revelation had begun. He placed Diana's diary carefully in his desk drawer, not to hide it, but to keep it close. Her words would continue to challenge and inspire him, reminding him of the man he could still become. He thought about calling William and Harry, about sharing some of what he had discovered. But he realized that his sons already knew their mother in ways he was only beginning to understand. They had been the recipients of her full attention, her unguarded love, her authentic self. They didn't need him to explain Diana to them. They needed him to learn from her example and become a better father and grandfather because of it. Charles pulled out a piece of paper and began to write his own letter, addressed to Diana. My dearest, Diana, I found your diary today and I finally understand what I lost when I lost you. Not just a wife, not just the mother of our children, but a woman of extraordinary courage, compassion, and wisdom. You grew into someone magnificent despite my failures to support you, and I am both humbled and inspired by your strength. I know I cannot undo the pain I caused you, but I promise to spend whatever years I have left trying to honor your memory by being better than I was. Our sons are your greatest legacy. They carry your heart into the world every day, and through them, your love continues to heal and inspire others. As he wrote, Charles felt some of the crushing weight of guilt begin to lift, not because he deserved forgiveness, but because he finally understood that Diana's story wasn't defined by his failures. She had transcended their troubled marriage to become exactly who she was meant to be, a force for good in the world, a voice for the voiceless, a woman who refused to let circumstances diminish her capacity for love. The diary had shown him that Diana's greatest triumph hadn't been in winning public adoration or achieving charitable success, though those were significant. Her greatest triumph had been in refusing to become bitter, in continuing to believe in love and hope despite experiencing profound disappointment, in raising their sons to be men of integrity and compassion. Charles finished his letter as the clock struck midnight, marking the end of the most transformative day of his life. He had begun the day as a man haunted by the ghost of a marriage he believed had failed because of irreconcilable differences. He was ending it as someone who finally understood that the failure had been his alone, not in being unable to love Diana, but in being too afraid to let himself be loved by her. Looking out the window at the garden where he had found solace, for so many years Charles saw it now as Diana might have, not as an escape from the messiness of human emotion, but as a metaphor for the kind of patient, nurturing attention that love required to flourish. He had given his plants everything they needed to grow and bloom. If only he had offered Diana the same care, the same dedication, the same belief in her potential. But perhaps it wasn't too late to apply those lessons. In his relationship with Camilla, in his bonds with his sons, in his interactions with everyone who crossed his path, Charles could choose to be more present, more open, more willing to see and value the hearts that others offered him. Diana's diary had given him an unexpected gift. Not just the truth about their marriage, but a roadmap for becoming the man she had always believed he could be. In reading her words, he had finally heard her voice, and in hearing her voice, he had found his own capacity for genuine love and authentic connection. The woman who had once written, "I just want to be loved for who I am," had, through her diary, taught him how to love others for who they truly were. It was a lesson that had come 20 years too late for their marriage, but it was not too late for the rest of his life. Diana's legacy would live on not just in the causes she had championed, or the sons she had raised, but in the transformation of the man who had finally learned to see her clearly, to love her fully, and to carry her wisdom forward into whatever years remained to him.